They say home is where your heart finds its safest harbor, a sanctuary, a haven from the world's storms. But for me, that was the greatest deception, the most profound lie I've ever come to know, because it wasn't out in the harsh world, but within the walls of my own childhood home, a room filled with innocent dolls on the dusty shelf, adorned with childish drawings on the faded walls, that my own brother unleashed a darkness that even the shadows might recoil from. And my father, well, my father worshipped him. His sun rose and set with that boy. Even now, at 73, I can still hear that rough, dismissive tone, making things up again. Girl, as if the swollen belly that formed inside me at 14 was merely a figment of my childish imagination. My name is Jessica Randall, but you can call me Miss Jessica. I was born in 1951, here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a time when children rarely had a voice, especially girls. We were taught to be quiet, to obey, to simply be grateful. Today, as I sit on the porch of my humble home, watching this warm July afternoon unfold, I feel a quiet urgency to finally tell a story I've kept locked away for nearly 6 decades. It's not a beautiful story. Mind you, it's the kind that twists your stomach, makes you want to cover your ears. But it needs to be spoken, because I know there are countless girls out there, facing their own private hells, believing they are utterly alone. If you're listening right now, wherever you are, tell me in the comments below. I want to feel how far my voice is reaching. How many souls across America are hearing this? And please, if this story resonates, a simple like or a subscription to Tenacity Tales truly means the world. Every gesture, every comment, gives me the courage to peel back these layers of unspoken pain, to bring to light what so many would rather just sweep under the rug. It helps keep these vital stories alive, doesn't it? I remember it vividly, as if it were yesterday. The precise moment, a chilling realization began to dawn on me. Something was profoundly wrong within the very core of my family. I must have been around 7, pretending to play house in our sun-drenched yard, when a harsh roar ripped through the quiet afternoon. It was my father, shouting at my mother from the kitchen. This wasn't unusual, not by a long shot. His voice was a constant, gruff presence in our home. But this time, it felt different. Martha, stop coddling that girl. Let her understand that in this house, I'm the one in charge. Me. And Tony. Tony, my older brother. 5 years. My senior. He had dark hair, a striking height, even at a young age. And those piercing green eyes that seemed to come from nowhere, as every other soul in our lineage had brown. The neighborhood ladies, they'd always coo about his good looks, predicting he'd break countless hearts. Oh, if only they knew. The very first heart he'd shatter, utterly beyond repair, it would be my own. My father, John Randall, was a man truly out of sync with his era, a relic of harsher times. He was steeped in the belief that women existed to serve, that men never shed tears, and that a single male child outweighed 10 daughters. His days were spent at the nuclear plant. What exactly he did there, I never knew, but he always returned cloaked in the scent of whiskey and stale cigarettes. When his mood was favorable, he simply pretended I didn't exist. But when darkness descended upon him, well, when he was in a bad mood, the wisest course of action was to vanish entirely. And my mother, Martha Randall, a name that truly encapsulated her spirit. She was a saint, always petite. Her hair invariably pulled back into a tight bun, her hands calloused from countless hours of taking in other people's laundry. She tried. Oh, how that poor woman tried. She did her best to shield me, to protect me from the storm that was my father. But against him, her efforts were largely in vain. "Stay quiet, my child," she'd whisper, her voice barely a breath. Whenever Daddy's shouting began, "It'll pass. It'll pass." Our home was one of those cramped three-room affairs, a living room that served every purpose imaginable, a bedroom for my parents, and a small, humble space at the back that Tony and I shared. In the very beginning, when I was just a tiny thing, we actually got along. He'd teach me how to scale trees, how to fish in the winding creek behind our house, even how to whistle a tune. But as the years unfolded, and I grew older, everything shifted. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A hand that lingered a little too long, a gaze that held a strange, unsettling intensity. I didn't truly grasp it then. I was just a child. After all, I genuinely believed it was normal for a brother to embrace his sister with such a suffocating tightness, to insist on sleeping in the same bed even when his own stood mere inches away. My mother would sometimes creep into our room in the dead of night and find him there. "Tony, go to your own bed. Boy," she'd say, her voice soft but firm. Yet, he always had an excuse. He was scared of the thunder. He was cold. He missed the days when he was little. And my father found it absolutely wonderful. "Look how much they love each other," he'd exclaim. A proud pat on Tony's back. Now that's a united family. Tony was the perfect son. In his eyes, he played baseball just like him, drank like him, swore like him. They were two peas in a pod, father and son, thick as thieves, partners in every conceivable way. I, on the other hand, was merely a burden. The girl born when they longed for another boy. A walking disappointment. My father made no secret of it. This one was a miscalculation. He'd tell his friends, his finger pointing directly at me. But what can you do? God wanted it that way. The first time I truly felt that something was fundamentally wrong, that a dark current flowed beneath our seemingly normal surface, was on an Easter Sunday. I must have been around 9, dressed in a cheerful yellow dress my mother had lovingly sewn. The house buzzed with family, uncles, cousins, laughter echoing everywhere. Everyone complimented how pretty I looked, how I was blossoming into a young lady. Normal. Right, just typical family chatter. But Tony didn't like it. I saw it in his eyes, that sudden, burning anger, the way he squeezed his soda cup until his knuckles turned white. When everyone drifted to the backyard for the barbecue, he pulled me aside. "Think you're so pretty?" "Huh?" Trying to get attention. I was utterly confused. Attention from whom? I was just there, quietly in my corner, savoring my piece of cake. But he continued, his voice low and menacing. "You're mine. You hear, mine. I don't want to see you giving anyone else the time of day. Mine." What did he mean? Mine. Brothers don't own sisters. But that day, at that precise moment, something irrevocably shifted. The way he looked at me transformed. It became possessive, dangerous. And I, even without fully comprehending the horror, felt a cold, creeping fear slither up my spine, twisting my stomach into knots. I tried to talk to my mother. "Mom? Tony is being strange with me." She was at the sink, hands deep in suds, her usually tired face etched with worry. She paused, looked at me, and in that brief glance, I saw it. I saw that she knew. I saw that she understood. But I also saw the same raw fear mirrored in her eyes, the very same fear that gripped my own heart. "It's all in your head. Honey, your brother loves you. He just wants to protect you." And with a sigh, She returned to scrubbing the plates with too much force, as if she could scrub away the unspoken truth that both of us knew, yet neither dared to voice. That was the moment I understood something truly terrible. I was utterly alone. My father was on his side, and my mother was too terrified to do anything. And there I was, caught in the suffocating middle, a 9-year-old girl forced to contend with a monster who slept in the very next room. Things only got worse, spiraling downwards into a darker abyss. He started intruding on my most private moments, coming into the bathroom when I was taking a shower. Forgot my towel. He'd mumble, but he'd just stand there, watching me. I'd shrink into the corner, trying to cover myself with my hands, my small body trembling. But he wouldn't leave. "What's the matter? I'm your brother? You don't have to be shy around me." The words were laced with a twisted innocence, a perverted normalcy that froze my blood. I started bathing with my clothes on. Believe it or not, seriously. I'd go into the bathroom fully dressed, lock the door, and only strip my clothes off inside the shower stall. But even then, he found a way. He'd bang on the door, sometimes even break down the flimsy latch, claiming he needed to use the bathroom urgently. My mother would complain about the broken latch, her voice tired and resigned. My father, of course, would simply dismiss it, blaming my carelessness. But the nights were infinitely worse, a living nightmare that stole my sleep and my innocence. He'd wait until everyone was deeply asleep, until the house was swallowed by silence. Then he'd creep into my room. At first, he'd just sit on the edge of my bed, his hand running through my hair. "You're beautiful. You know that. The most beautiful in the family." I'd pretend to be asleep, squeezing my eyes shut so hard they hurt, praying with every fiber of my being for him to just disappear. Sometimes, by some small mercy, it worked. Sometimes, it didn't. When I turned 11, that fragile thread of control completely snapped. Everything spiraled, violently, irrevocably. It happened on my birthday. Actually, my mother had managed to bake a simple cake, just cornbread with strawberry jam. A small gesture in our bleak existence. Only the 4 of us sang "Happy Birthday." No friends. No festive party. My father, in a grim parody of a gift, handed me an old doll he'd unearthed from who knows where. "You're getting too old for this nonsense," he grumbled, his voice devoid of warmth. "But here you go." Tony, on the other hand, presented a necklace, a cheap plastic thing, the kind you'd find at a dollar store. Yet, he transformed its presentation into a grand ceremony, declaring it for my beautiful little sister. And then he pulled me into an embrace right there, in front of everyone, a hug that lingered far too long, holding me far too tight. I felt his hand, insidious and cold, sliding down my back, coming to rest exactly where it shouldn't. My eyes, wide with desperation, darted to my mother. She saw me. She knew, but she merely looked away. That night, he came to my room again. But this time, it was horrifyingly different. This time, he didn't just watch. "You're a young lady now," he whispered into my ear, his breath hot and foul. "Time to learn some things." I was shaking so violently, the bed itself seemed to tremble. I tried to scream, but his hand clamped over my mouth, muffling the sound. "Be quiet. If you scream, I'll tell Dad you've been fooling around with Mike from the grocery store. You know what he'll do to you." I knew. Oh, God. I knew. I'd seen him beat my mother for far less. Once, she merely smiled at the gas delivery man, and she suffered for a week. Imagine what he'd do to me if he believed I was offering myself to the neighborhood boys. As he so often put it, so I stayed quiet. I bit down hard on my pillow, tasting fabric and fear, and remained silent while my brother committed acts that, even today, I struggle to put into words. It hurt. It hurt so much, I genuinely thought I would die. But the physical agony, excruciating as it was, paled in comparison to the searing pain in my soul. To know that this was happening, that my world was collapsing, and absolutely nobody would help me. The next day, I could barely walk. My legs felt like lead. My body ached with a silent scream. My mother noticed. Of course, mothers always do, even when they pretend not to. What's wrong? Jessica, why are you limping? I quickly fabricated a story, mumbling that I had fallen. She didn't press, didn't ask anything else. But later, when Tony wasn't looking, she quietly applied some antiseptic to my raw wounds. Her hands trembled. Silent tears streamed down her face, but not a single word escaped her lips. She never did speak up. From that night on, it became a grim routine. 2, 3 times a week, sometimes even more. He'd wait until everyone was deeply asleep, and then he would come. I learned to detach myself. It's truly astonishing how the mind can choose to escape the body when it's pushed to the absolute edge. I'd imagine I was flying, a free bird soaring high in the boundless sky, that I was absolutely anywhere but there, trapped in that bed, with that oppressive weight suffocating me. My father continued to live in his delusion, believing Tony was the epitome of greatness. The two would venture out to the local bar together, returning home drunk, their voices raised in slurred songs. "This is my son," he'd bellow for the entire neighborhood to hear. A real man, not like that boring girl Jessica. Meanwhile, I was visibly withering away. I stopped eating properly, my once lively chatter replaced by a profound silence. At school, teachers would sometimes ask if everything was all right at home. I'd simply nod. A quiet yes. What else was I going to say? Who would possibly believe me? Tony was everyone's darling. Handsome, polite, always ready to lend a hand. He'd help old ladies with their groceries, play ball with the neighborhood kids. The perfect son. No one, absolutely no one, could have imagined the monster he became once our doors closed. There was one day I almost told everything. It was to Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor. She was remarkably different from the others. No husband, living alone, working outside the home, a rarity in our small town. The other women whispered about her behind her back, muttering that she was a lesbian, that she wasn't respectable, but she was unfailingly kind to me. "Jessica, honey, you're not well," she said one day, finding me huddled and crying behind the church, my body racked with silent sobs. "What's happening?" I opened my mouth to speak. The words were there, trembling on the tip of my tongue. My brother, he does things. But then, a cold dread seized me. I remembered my father, what he was capable of doing, not just to me, but to my mother, to anyone who dared to get involved. And so, the words died in my throat. I shut down. "It's nothing, Mrs. Johnson. I'm just sad because I fought with a friend." She didn't believe me. I could see it clearly in her kind, knowing eyes. Yet, mercifully, she didn't push. Years later, long after everything had transpired, she sought me out. I knew. "Jessica," she confessed, her voice heavy with regret. "I knew and I did nothing. Forgive me." I forgave her. Of course. What could she have truly done in those days? Nobody. Nobody talked about these things. It was a family secret. A verboten subject. A crushing shame carried in suffocating silence. As the years crept by, bringing with them a creeping dread, I started to change. My body, once that of a child, began its slow, confusing transformation. I was 11, then 12, then 13, and with each passing month, the soft curves of adolescence started to emerge. My chest began to bud. My hips subtly widened. It was a natural, beautiful progression for other girls. A rite of passage. For me, it was a terrifying beacon, drawing Tony's twisted attention even more acutely. He seemed to relish these changes, to watch them with a predatory gleam in his eyes. He'd make comments, quiet and chilling, about how I was blossoming into a real woman, as if my burgeoning womanhood was simply a new, more intriguing plaything for him. He grew bolder, more brazen. No longer content with just the nights, he'd corner me during the day, in the hallway, in the kitchen, even in the tiny, cramped backyard. There was no escape. His touch was a violation, a constant, sickening reminder that my body was not my own. It was his. A prize to be claimed, a possession to be used whenever he pleased. I was merely a doll, a rag doll, to be picked up and discarded at his whim. The horror was no longer confined to the dark, secret hours of night. It permeated every waking moment, every corner of that suffocating house. I learned to move like a ghost, to become as invisible as possible, always listening, always watching, always bracing myself for the next inevitable encounter. I tried to stay hidden, to blend into the shadows, but it was useless. He always found me. He always did. The silence of the house became a heavy blanket, a shroud of complicity, where no one spoke. No one saw. No one dared to intervene. And in that suffocating quiet, my very being, my essence, slowly began to wither, replaced by an emptiness that threatened to consume me whole. It was a cold, desolate afternoon in December. The kind of gray, heavy day that makes you want to crawl under a blanket and never emerge. Everyone else was out, my father at work, my mother at the grocery store, Tony God knows where. For a rare, fleeting moment, I was alone in that suffocating house. I had just finished my chores, my hands raw from scrubbing the kitchen floor. When he materialized, Tony. He came out of nowhere, blocking the doorway to the kitchen, his green eyes glinting with that familiar, predatory fire. Well, what do we have here, little Jessica, all alone? I felt a shiver of dread. I knew what was coming. I always knew. But this time, something in me snapped. Perhaps it was the bone-deep weariness, the endless cycle of fear and violation. Perhaps it was the realization that I was utterly, completely trapped. I fought back. I pushed. I clawed. I kicked with a desperation I didn't know I possessed. Leave me alone. Get away from me. My voice was a raw, broken plea. But he was stronger, far stronger. He slammed me against the wall, the impact jarring my teeth. And then, in a terrifying blur, he dragged me down to the basement. The very basement where my father would keep his tools, where cobwebs hung thick like shrouds, and the air was always damp and smelled of mildew. It was a dark, s'il place, a tomb in our own house. He used his strength, his weight, and I, a young girl, was no match. He hurt me, more than ever before, a pain so profound, so violating, that I thought my spirit would simply leave my body. When it was over, I lay there, on the cold concrete floor, bruised and broken, the silence of the basement ringing in my ears. I wanted to die. I wanted to simply cease to exist. The basement door creaked open, and I saw her, my mother. She was standing there, a grocery bag slipping from her numb fingers, her face a mask of horror. She saw the bruises, the tears, the vacant stare in my eyes. She saw the utter devastation, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away. Instead, a guttural cry ripped from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain and grief. She knelt beside me, pulling me into her arms, holding me tightly, rocking me back and forth. "My baby? My poor baby," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with mine. Oh, God. My baby. In that moment, a fragile, desperate decision was forged between us. A silent vow. We would run. We would leave this hell. We would leave everything behind. We held on to that desperate, silent promise like a lifeline. My mother, her eyes still red and swollen, helped me gather a few meager belongings. A thin blanket, a change of clothes, a small handful of coins she'd managed to hide over the years. We were going to leave. We were going to escape. The raw, exhilarating hope that surged through me was almost unbearable. But then, just as we were about to slip out the back door, the front door burst open. My father was there. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice, usually gruff, now held an ominous, chilling calm. My mother, trembling, tried to explain. "John, please. We have to go. Jessica, she's sick." But he just laughed. A cold, dismissive sound that curdled my blood. Tony, ever the snake, appeared behind him. His face, a picture of feigned innocence. "Dad, it's just Jessica. She's making things up again, trying to get attention." And my father, blinded by his twisted devotion to his son, believed him. He believed Tony. Not me, not his wife. "You liar," he roared, his eyes blazing with fury as he seized my mother by her hair, dragging her away from me, trying to run away with that little harlot. He struck her, not just once, but again and again, with a ferocity that stole the breath from my lungs. My mother, defeated, crumpled to the floor, her spirit shattering before my very eyes. She lay there, sobbing, a broken heap of a woman, no longer fighting. The hope, so vibrant just moments ago, withered and died. He then turned to me, his face contorted with rage. You're staying right here. You're my property." He locked the door, pocketed the key, and from that day forward, my life became an inescapable prison. From that moment on, I was an official prisoner in my own home. I couldn't even step into the backyard for a breath of fresh air without my father or Tony watching my every move. They wanted to ensure I wouldn't try to escape again. Every door, every window, became a barrier. Not to keep danger out, but to keep me in. And Tony continued his reign of terror. He still came to my room at night, his touch a familiar horror. "You see," he'd whisper, his voice dripping with triumph. "You're mine. Always have been. Always will be." The despair was a suffocating cloak, heavy and omnipresent. I was trapped, utterly powerless, forced to endure the unspeakable, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. The 9-year-old girl who believed she was a victim, who had crumpled under the weight of fear, was gone. In her place, a new resolve had begun to form, a cold, hard kernel of determination. I was no longer just a victim. I was a survivor. And one day, somehow, I would find a way out. Not just for myself, but for the life that was quietly, secretly, beginning to stir within me. The cold grip of winter gave way to the subtle whispers of spring. In 1965, I was 14. The nightmares of my confinement, the endless cycle of fear and violation, continued. Yet, a new, unsettling sensation began to emerge. A constant, nauseating wave that rolled through my stomach each morning, leaving me weak and breathless. At first, I dismissed it as just another symptom of my misery, another burden my body had to bear. But as the weeks crawled by, the feeling intensified. Food, even the simplest bite, became repulsive. My mother, with her sharp, knowing eyes, noticed. She started watching me more closely, her gaze lingering on my face, then my midsection, a silent question forming in her weary eyes. "Jessica, honey, are you eating enough?" she'd ask, her voice laced with concern. "You look so pale." By February, a dreadful certainty began to settle over me. The sickness wasn't just a fleeting ailment. I was late. Days turned into weeks. And the familiar rhythm of my body, once predictable, now stubbornly refused to return. And then, other signs began to appear: a subtle roundness in my lower belly, a tenderness in my breasts, a tiredness that dragged me down even after a full night's sleep. The pieces clicked into place, one by one, forming a mosaic of horror I couldn't bear to look at. I was pregnant. At 14, the child of my own brother. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, twisting my gut into a knot of pure terror. The world spun. The room tilted. I was trapped, utterly, irrevocably, not just in this house, but within my own body, nurturing the monstrous fruit of a sin I hadn't committed. The injustice of it all, the utter devastation, was a suffocating weight. How could this be happening? How could I, a child, to be carrying another life? Born of such darkness, the desperation was a living, breathing thing, consuming every ounce of my being. Panic was a constant, suffocating companion. I was a child myself, completely lost. Yet, I was carrying a secret that was growing. Literally, inside me. I tried everything to hide it. I started wearing my mother's old dresses, shapeless sacks of fabric that hopefully concealed the subtle curve of my belly. I'd wrap old towels around my waist, binding myself tightly, trying to flatten the undeniable evidence. I'd avoid mirrors, avoid looking down at my own body, pretending that if I didn't see it, it wasn't real. But the morning sickness persisted, a cruel daily reminder. And then came the movements. Tiny, fluttering sensations at first, like a butterfly trapped inside me. Then stronger kicks, undeniable proof that a life was forming, independent and relentless. I remember one particular morning in March, crisp and bright, a false promise of new beginnings. I was sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over a bowl of oatmeal. I couldn't bring myself to eat. When my mother came in, she was humming a quiet tune, her hands busy untying her apron. But then she paused. Her eyes, usually so tired, sharpened, focusing on me. She walked around the table, slowly, deliberately, until she was standing right behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. I braced myself, closing my eyes. I willing myself to become invisible, Then I felt her hands, not on my face, not on my shoulders, but gently, tentatively, on my belly. Her fingers, calloused but tender, felt the undeniable curve, the undeniable hardness beneath the fabric. A gasp, sharp and sudden, escaped her lips, a sound I'd never heard before, a mix of pure shock and profound grief. Her hands immediately flew to her mouth, stifling a sob, but her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, met mine in the reflection of the window. In that single, agonizing moment, the truth exploded between us. Unspoken, but screamingly clear. We just looked at each other. Two broken women in a silent kitchen, tears streaming down both our faces. Then, she pulled me into her arms. A desperate, almost violent embrace that squeezed the air from my lungs. We just stood there, swaying, sobbing together. A shared pain, a shared secret that had finally burst into the open. My God, Jessica, she whispered, her voice raw with anguish. My God, she wanted to tell my father. We have to. Jessica, he needs to know. He'll do something. But I clung to her, my voice hoarse with fear. No, please. Mom. No, he'll kill me. He'll kill us both. Please. Just wait. Please. She looked at me, her face a crumpled mess of despair, and I saw the familiar fear return to her eyes, the same fear that had paralyzed her for years. She finally nodded, a barely perceptible tremor in her chin. Okay. My child. Okay. We'll wait. But you're not alone. Not anymore. From that day on, a silent pact formed between us. She started sneaking me extra food. For your appetite, she'd say, her eyes darting to the door. She'd bring me old, faded blankets to wrap myself in, pretending it was for the cold. She would sit with me at night, just holding my hand. Her presence a thin, fragile shield against the terror that lurked outside our shared silence. She was still Martha, the obedient wife, the silent sufferer. But for me, in those quiet, stille moments, she was my mother again, my only ally in a world consumed by shadows. While my world was shrinking, suffocated by a secret that grew larger with each passing day, Tony remained oblivious. He continued his grotesque visits, his familiar pattern of violation. It was as if my changing body, the life blossoming inside me, was completely invisible to him. Or perhaps, worse, he simply didn't care. His actions were always about power, about control, about marking me as his own. The idea of a child, a tangible consequence of his depravity, seemed utterly irrelevant to his twisted mind. He continued to come to my room at night, his touch a familiar horror, his whispers filled with that possessive venom. You're mine, Jessica. Always have been, always will be. Each word was a fresh brand, burning deeper into my soul, a reminder of the inescapable truth that I was merely a vessel for his twisted desires. The fear, already a constant companion, now became a suffocating shroud. My belly grew, subtly at first, then undeniably. Each week, the fabric of my mother's old dresses stretched a little tighter. Each morning, the nauseating lurch in my stomach became more pronounced. I lived in a state of perpetual dread, terrified that any moment, someone, my father, a neighbor, anyone would notice. The secret felt like a bomb ticking inside me, ready to explode and expose the horror to the entire world. What would happen then? Would my father finally kill me? Would he cast me out? Alone and pregnant, onto the unforgiving streets, the thought of facing his wrath, of being completely abandoned, was a terror far greater than any physical pain. I felt like a hunted animal, constantly scanning my surroundings, always ready to flee. Even though there was nowhere to run, my world was shrinking, day by day, until it was just me and this growing secret, trapped within the suffocating walls of a home that had become my cruelest prison. It was a sweltering May evening, the kind where the air hangs heavy and still, promising a storm that never breaks. My father, in one of his rare, drunkenly expansive moods, had invited some of his drinking buddies over. The house, usually so quiet and oppressive, was filled with raucous laughter, the clinking of beer bottles, and the acrid scent of stale tobacco. I was doing my best to remain invisible, serving them drinks, moving like a ghost through the haze of smoke and boisterous voices. My mother, exhausted, had long since retreated to the bedroom, leaving me to face the gathering alone. My belly, now unmistakably round, felt like a beacon, a screaming testament to my hidden shame. I tried to keep my back to them, to hide the undeniable curve beneath my loose dress, but the room was too small, the scrutiny too intense. Then it happened. My father, his eyes glazed with alcohol, suddenly pointed a finger at me. "Hey, what's wrong with that girl? Why's she gotten so plump?" The laughter died down. All eyes turned to me. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken questions. My heart hammered against my ribs. A desperate bird trapped in a cage. My father, now swaying slightly, stumbled towards me, his eyes narrowing. "Come here. Girl, let me see you." I instinctively took a step back, my legs heavy with dread. But it was useless. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, and spun me around, exposing my swollen belly to the harsh, unforgiving light. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The men, their faces suddenly sobered, exchanged horrified glances. "What is this?" My father roared, his voice shaking with a terrifying mix of fury and disbelief. "Who did this to you?" My mind raced, a frantic search for an escape. Ali. Anything. But before I could utter a single word, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Tony. He had been lurking in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. And now, with a chillingly calculated move, he stepped forward. His face was a picture of righteous indignation, his green eyes flashing with feigned anger. "It's Mike. Dad," he yelled, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence. "Mike Johnson from the grocery store. I saw them together, sneaking around behind the church. The little slut." He said it with such conviction, such fury, that for a split second, even I almost believed him. My father's face, already contorted with rage, turned a shade of purple, his eyes, burning with a monstrous fire, locked onto mine. "Mike Johnson," he repeated, the name a curse on his lips. "That little punk, I'll kill him, I swear to God. I'll kill him." And in that terrifying moment, the monster in my brother had found his perfect scapegoat. The next day, a storm of fury descended upon Oak Ridge. My father, true to his word, dragged Tony with him to Mike Johnson's house. Mike, poor, innocent Mike, who worked tirelessly at the local gas station to help his struggling family. He was just a kind, quiet boy, barely a man himself, who had never done anything to deserve the fate that awaited him. My father, a man possessed by blind rage, didn't bother to ask questions, didn't seek explanations. He simply roared, his accusations echoing through the quiet streets, shaming Mike and his parents in front of the entire neighborhood. The Johnsons, the Cent, hard-working family, were shattered. Within a week, unable to bear the whispers, the stares, the endless shame, they packed their meager belongings and vanished from Oak Ridge, leaving behind everything they knew, their lives irrevocably destroyed by a lie. And I became the town's scarlet letter, a walking testament to shame and sin. My father forbade me from leaving the house, from going to school, from even stepping foot outside without his explicit permission. I was confined to the suffocating walls of our home, a prisoner in every sense of the word. The whispers followed me even there, in my own mind, echoing the judgment of a society that condemned me without knowing the first thing about my truth. My mother, in her silent desperation, would sometimes sneak me stale bread and water, but her eyes held a new, deeper sorrow, a reflection of the utter helplessness that had consumed her. She saw me, but she couldn't save me. Meanwhile, Tony, the true architect of this nightmare, walked free, his head held high. He became the hero in our twisted family narrative, the brave young man who had exposed a scandal, who had protected his innocent sister from a rogue boy. My father would proudly boast about him to anyone who would listen, cementing his status as the perfect son. But the worst part, Tony still came to my room. At night, after everyone was asleep, he'd slip in, his green eyes glinting in the moonlight. He'd sit on my bed, his voice a low, chilling murmur. "He's mine, Jessica," he'd whisper, his hand resting on my swollen belly. "A grotesque claim. My son? My little Charles." He'd already decided the name. A chilling assertion of his ownership, his twisted claim on the life growing inside me. My Charles, the son of a monster, born of pure terror. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, I could do to stop it. My life became a slow, agonizing countdown. Trapped within those suffocating walls, I was a ghost haunting my own home. Every day was a relentless battle against boredom, fear, and the sheer physical discomfort of my rapidly growing body. The outside world, once a distant dream, now felt like another dimension, a place I could never touch again. I could no longer go to school, no longer pretend to be a normal girl. My father's decree was absolute: "You're a disgrace. Stay hidden." And so I did. The whispers that had once been distant now felt like they were echoing inside my own head, the judging glances of invisible townspeople searing into my soul. Even at church, a place that should have offered solace, I felt their eyes on me, felt the weight of their silent condemnation. It was a suffocating, inescapable shame. By August, the heat of the Tennessee summer was oppressive, a heavy blanket that clung to everything. And my body. My body was a grotesque parody of what it should be. 8 months pregnant. I was massive, cumbersome, struggling to move even a few steps without gasping for breath. The backaches were constant, the swollen ankles a daily torment. Sleep was a luxury I rarely afforded myself. Constantly shifting, trying to find a comfortable position that simply didn't exist. My mother, bless her weary soul, became my silent shadow. She was a midwife, trained in the quiet arts of childbirth, and she knew exactly what was coming. She began her preparations meticulously, moving with a quiet solemnity, gathering old sheets, boiling water, preparing a small, private space in the back room, a makeshift delivery room, a secret sanctuary for a birth that would be a tragedy in every sense of the word. She didn't speak of it. Of course, we never spoke of it. The weight of the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air between us, a silent understanding of the painful, inevitable journey that lay ahead. I was terrified, terrified of the pain, terrified of the unknown, but most of all, terrified of what this new life, born of such darkness, would bring. It was the first week of September, the air still thick with summer humidity, but a subtle crispness hinted at the coming autumn. I woke up with a sharp, wrenching pain in my lower back, a sensation I'd never felt before, yet instinctively recognized as the beginning of the end. My mother, who had been sleeping in the tiny, makeshift delivery room next to me, was immediately awake. Her face, usually so composed, now held a grim determination. "It's time, Jessica," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's time." The next 16 hours blurred into an eternity of agony. Each contraction was a wave of pure torment, gripping my body, threatening to rip me apart. I bit down on a rolled-up towel. Hard, the rough fabric digging into my lips. Anything to muffle the screams that clawed at my throat. I couldn't scream. I wouldn't. Not when my father and Tony were just in the next room, oblivious. Or perhaps simply uncaring. My mother, a pillar of quiet strength, guided me through each harrowing minute. Her hands, rough from work, but incredibly gentle, wiped the sweat from my brow, pressed cool cloths to my forehead, whispered words of encouragement. "You're strong, my child. You can do this. Just a little more." Her presence was the only tether to reality, the only comfort in a world consumed by pain. I pushed, I strained, I fought with every ounce of my rapidly dwindling strength. It felt like I was tearing myself apart, sacrificing every fiber of my being to bring this new life into the world. The room was dark, lit only by a single flickering oil lamp, casting dancing shadows on the walls, making the small space feel even more oppressive. I remember the exhaustion, the fear, the sheer, unimaginable pain. And then, a different kind of pain, a tearing sensation, followed by a sudden, intense pressure, and then silence. A strange, breathless silence, broken only by my ragged gasps for air. My mother let out a deep, trembling sigh of relief, and then a cry, not a scream, not a wail, but a strong, indignant cry, the sound of new life. My mother lifted him, a tiny, squirming bundle, and placed him gently on my chest. He was small, so small, his skin still slightly wrinkled, his tiny fists clenched. I looked down at him, my vision blurred by tears and exhaustion, and then I saw them. His eyes, wide open, a startling shade of green, just like Tony's. The world stopped. The pain, the exhaustion, the relief, everything faded into the background. All I could see were those eyes, a chilling echo of the monster who had condemned me to this fate. A wave of nausea, sharper than any morning sickness, washed over me. My son, born of him, my mother, her face streaked with tears, lifted the tiny, squirming bundle from my chest. For a moment, I felt a strange emptiness, a hollow ache where his small body had been. But then, she held him out, her eyes pleading with mine. "Jessica? Look at him. He's perfect." And in that very instant, as if a switch had been flipped inside my soul, everything changed. The green eyes, a horrifying echo just moments ago, faded. All I saw was a tiny, innocent face, a miniature hand reaching out. A life completely dependent on me. My baby, my son. And in that raw, primal moment, a fierce, protective love surged through me, erasing all the darkness, all the pain, all the fear. It was a love so pure, so absolute, that it felt like a miracle. This tiny being, born of such an unimaginable horror, was suddenly my entire world. Just as I was trying to sit up, to truly hold him in my arms, the door to the back room burst open. My father stood there, his eyes bloodshot, his face a grim mask. Behind him, Tone appeared, a smirk playing on his lips, those same green eyes gleaming with a sick triumph. "What's all this ruckus?" my father grumbled, stepping inside, his gaze falling first on my mother, then on the tiny bundle in her arms. "So, it's done. Then, is it a boy or a girl?" My mother, trembling, whispered, "A boy. John, a healthy boy." My father nodded slowly. Then, to my utter shock, he took a step forward. "Good. A boy? We'll call him Charles. Charles Randall. Charles." He had a name given by the man who had condemned me. Then, Tony moved. He pushed past my father, his gaze fixed on the baby. He knelt down, his face unnervingly close to the tiny, innocent bundle. "Let me see him," had demanded, his voice low, filled with a chilling possessiveness. My mother, with a hesitant glance at me, gently handed Charles to him. Tony held the baby, his large hand dwarfing the infant's head. He looked into those wide, green eyes, the very eyes that mirrored his own. A slow, twisted smile spread across his face. A triumphant, sickening grin. "Look at him, Dad," he said, his voice thick with a perverse pride. "He's just like me. My son. My little Charles." He said it loud enough for me to hear. "A cruel." Final assertion of his victory. My heart seized. He was not just claiming the child. He was claiming the very act that created him. My son. The son of a monster. And in that moment, as Tony held my baby, I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that my fight had just begun. This precious life, this innocent child, was the one thing I had left to protect, no matter the cost. My father, John Randall, a man whose heart was colder than any Tennessee winter, never acknowledged Charles as anything but Tony's son. He clung to that narrative with a terrifying, unshakable conviction. He would hold Charles, his face softening ever so slightly, and declare to anyone who would listen, "This boy, this is my son's boy, a real Randall." Unlike her, his eyes would then flick to me, filled with a bottomless contempt that cut deeper than any physical blow. He saw me as nothing more than a ruined vessel, a stain on his family name, a walking reminder of the scandal Tony had so masterfully fabricated. My presence was an affront, a constant source of his simmering rage. He'd barely speak to me, and when he did, his words were laced with venom, dismissive and cruel. I was invisible, yet constantly under his judgmental gaze. My mother, Martha, the woman whose spirit had been slowly crushed by years of silent suffering, tried. Oh, how she tried. She loved Charles with a fierce, quiet devotion, a love that was a balm to my raw, bleeding soul. She'd hold him, sing him lullabies, and sneak me extra food and water in the dead of night, her eyes always filled with a sorrowful tenderness. She was my only ally, my only comfort. But the weight of her own silent pain The years of abuse, the impossible secret we shared, proved too much. One cold November morning, just as the leaves were falling and the world was turning gray, I woke up to an eerie silence. The house felt strangely empty. I went to her room, and she wasn't there. Her side of the bed was cold, untouched. Her small, worn Bible lay open on the nightstand, a single pressed lily tucked between its pages, and a note, a single, tear-stained note, addressed to me, "My dearest Jessica." It read, her handwriting shaky and faded. "I can't do this anymore. I'm so sorry. I love you, my sweet child, and I love my precious grandson, but I can't live like this. The pain, it's too much. Forgive me. Live for both of us, and protect him. My love. Protect Charles with everything you have. Remember that God loves you. Even when no one else seems to, I'm going to find peace. Somewhere." Martha. She was gone. She had walked out of that house of horrors and never looked back. My only protector, my only confidante, had surrendered to the darkness that had consumed her for so long. The loss was a gaping wound, fresh and agonizing. On top of all the others, I was truly, utterly alone now. Just me and Charles. A tiny, innocent beacon in a world that had become a desolate, unforgiving wasteland. With my mother gone, the house felt even more like a tomb, heavy with unspoken sorrows. But Charles was my lifeline. He was tiny, vulnerable, completely dependent on me. And in his innocence, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. I became his sole protector, his only world. Every feeding, every diaper change, every soft lullaby I sang to him in the quiet hours of the night was an act of defiance, a silent promise that I would fight for his life, for his future. He was a sweet, gentle baby, always reaching for me, his tiny hand gripping my finger when he looked at me, his green eyes, so much like Tony's, held only pure, unadulterated love. And in those moments, I saw not the monster, but my son, my beautiful, innocent Charles. My father, if possible, became even more withdrawn, his temper even more volatile. He spent most of his time at the bar, returning only to eat and sleep, barely acknowledging our existence. He saw Charles as a miniature version of Tony, a new puppet for his twisted admiration. He'd occasionally pick Charles up, hold him awkwardly, and then hand him back to me with a grunt. "He's just like his father," he'd mumble, a strange mixture of pride and indifference in his voice. Tony, too, continued his perverse charade. He'd visit Charles, cooing over him, playing the doting uncle or brother. But his true nature, the predator within, still haunted my nights. He still came to my room, his presence a dark cloud that smothered any semblance of peace. My body was still his battleground, my will still his prisoner. But now, with Charles in my arms, a new, desperate resolve began to take root. I had to escape, not just for myself, but for him. I couldn't let my son grow up in this hell. In the shadow of such darkness, I started to plan, meticulously, secretly. Every spare moment, every flicker of hope, was dedicated to finding a way out. I listened intently whenever my father or Tony discussed their plans, memorizing their schedules, their routines. I began to hoard small amounts of money, coins I found tucked away in old drawers, scraps my mother had left behind. Every penny was a step closer to freedom. I studied maps of Oak Ridge, tracing possible, Escape routes. Imagining myself and Charles far away, in a place where we could be safe, where he could grow up knowing only love, not fear. The thought of leaving, of venturing into the unknown, was terrifying. But the thought of staying, of allowing Charles to become another victim in this house of horrors, was infinitely more so. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would do whatever it took, no matter the cost. The first time I tried to escape, Charles was barely 3 months old. He was a tiny, fragile bundle, sleeping soundly in my arms as I crept towards the back door. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar emotion, surged through me. My father was out, and Tony, I believed, was asleep after a night of heavy drinking. This was my chance. I'd hoarded a few meager belongings: a blanket, some stolen bread, a disparate prayer on my lips. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. But my hands were steady as I unlatched the door. The cold night air hit my face. A promise of freedom. But freedom was a mirage. As I stepped onto the porch, a voice, chillingly calm, cut through the silence. Going somewhere. Jessica, Tony stood there, leaning against the old oak tree, a dark silhouette against the moonless sky. He hadn't been asleep. He'd been waiting. Terror, cold and absolute, seized me. Before I could even whimper, he was on me, his hand snatching Charles from my arms. Trying to take my son? Huh, he hissed, his voice laced with a fury that promised swift retribution. My father, roused by the commotion, stumbled out, his face contorted in a mask of rage. What followed was a brutal, dizzying haze of pain and despair. My father, fueled by alcohol and fury, beat me mercilessly. He called me every vile name imaginable, condemning me for my ungratefulness and betrayal. Each blow was a fresh brand, burning deeper into my soul, shattering the fragile hope I had dared to nurture. Tony stood by, a silent, triumphant witness, his green eyes gleaming with a sick satisfaction. When they were finally done, I lay on the cold, dusty floor, broken, bruised, and utterly defeated. Charles, mercifully, was still asleep, cradled by Tony, oblivious to the hell that had just unfolded. From that day on, my life became a literal prison. My father nailed shut my bedroom window, bolted the back door, and explicitly forbade me from leaving the house without his direct supervision. Tony's control, already suffocating, tightened even further. He now had definitive proof of my disloyalty, and he used it as an excuse to make my existence a living hell. His visits to my room becoming more frequent, more prolonged, more brutal. I was a prisoner, bound by chains of fear and despair, with no hope of escape. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, each one a stark, suffocating reminder of my failed escape and deeper imprisonment. My world had shrunk to the confines of my room, broken only by the dreaded visits of Tony and the ever-present, simmering rage of my father. Charles, my innocent Charles, was growing, crawling, pulling himself up, blissfully unaware of the silent war raging around him. He was the only light in my desolate existence. It was during one of my rare, supervised outings to church, a forced display of our respectability, that I saw her. A young woman, perhaps a few years older than me, with bright, inquisitive eyes and a cascade of fiery red hair. She was new to Oak Ridge, having moved from New York, a fact that fascinated the gossiping women of our small town. Her name was Rosie. Unlike the others, whose glances were always filled with judgment and pity. Rosie looked at me with genuine curiosity. And something else. Understanding. She didn't turn away when she saw my swollen belly. Didn't whisper behind her hand. She simply offered a small, kind smile. That simple smile became my lifeline. Slowly, cautiously, we began to talk after church services, always under the watchful eye of my father. Rosie was unlike anyone I had ever met. She spoke of a world beyond Oak Ridge, a world of possibilities, of choices, of freedom. She never asked about my past, never pried into my shame. She simply listened, offered comfort, and, most importantly, offered a glimpse of hope. When I finally, haltingly, confessed my disparity, decided to escape, to give Charles a real life, her eyes lit up with fierce determination. "You have to get out of here, Jessica," she declared, her voice firm, "and I'll help you." Rosie knew people in New York, a network of women who helped others in need. She spoke of safe houses, of jobs, of a fresh start. But there was one insurmountable hurdle: money. New York was a long way, and starting over from scratch required resources I simply didn't possess. The dream felt tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far. Still, knowing I wasn't alone, that someone believed in me, was a strength I hadn't felt in years. Oak Ridge was celebrating its centennial, a grand affair meant to showcase the town's enduring spirit. My father, in one of his rare, almost sober moments of civic pride, insisted I attend the main ceremony at the town square. He wanted to project an image of a functional, respectable family. Despite the crumbling reality within our home, I went, a phantom amidst the festive crowd, clutching Charles tightly, trying to make myself as small as possible. The speeches droned on, celebrating the town's founders, its values, its future. I felt a bitter irony twist in my gut. Surrounded by so much proclaimed virtue, then she appeared, Mrs. Laura Wilson, the mayor's wife. She was an elegant woman, impeccably dressed, with a kind, intelligent gaze that seemed to see right through the facades people built. She was known to be quiet, reserved, and often seemed detached from the superficiality of town politics. More importantly, it was widely whispered that she yearned for a child, a sorrow she carried with quiet dignity. As she moved through the crowd, greeting dignitaries, her eyes met mine. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in them, not judgment, but a deep, empathetic sadness, a recognition of my hidden pain. She paused. Then, with a gentle smile, she approached me. "What a beautiful little boy you have," she murmured, her voice soft and warm, reaching out to lightly touch Charles's tiny hand. Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed again, often by coincidence at the general store or the post office. Mrs. Wilson always sought me out, her conversations deceptively casual. She asked about Charles, about my life, never pushing, just listening with genuine concern. One afternoon, she invited me to her home under the guise of helping her organize some charity donations. There, away from prying eyes, she presented me with a small, heavy purse. "This is for Charles," she said, her voice firm but kind. "For his future. And these, for you." She then handed me a box of baby clothes. Not hand-me-downs, but new, beautiful outfits, along with some practical items like a sturdy blanket and a small, discreet packet of cash tucked within. My eyes welled up. I tried to protest, But she gently cut me off. No arguments. Dear, every child deserves a chance. And every mother deserves to fight for it. From that day on, Mrs. Wilson became my secret benefactress. Her generosity, given in small, untraceable ways, provided the crucial financial lifeline I desperately needed. Every penny, every dollar, was meticulously saved, hidden away, building the foundation for our escape. The plan was no longer a desperate dream, it was becoming a tangible possibility. The winter of 1967 had truly set in, biting cold and relentless. Life in the house continued its bleak, a monotonous rhythm, punctuated by Tony's increasingly bold abuses and my father's drunken rages. Charles was nearly 2 years old now, a lively, curious toddler, utterly unaware of the darkness that shrouded his early years. My secret savings, painstakingly gathered from Mrs. Wilson's quiet generosity, grew steadily, a tangible glimmer of hope in my suffocating existence. Rosie was my steadfast confidante, a beacon of support, constantly reminding me of the world waiting beyond Oakridge. Then, one bitterly cold morning, a strange silence descended upon the house. No familiar sounds of my father stirring. No drunken shouts. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. Tony, usually the first to rise after his late-night escapades, also remained unusually quiet. I crept out of my room, clutching Charles, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, unbidden sense of anticipation. I found my father in his armchair, slumped over, a half-empty bottle of whiskey clutched in his stiff hand. His face was ashen, his eyes staring blankly at the cold fireplace. He was gone. A massive heart attack, the town doctor would later confirm, hastened by years of alcohol abuse. A wave of complex emotions washed over me, a cold, stark sense of relief, a lingering residue of fear, and a strange, hollow emptiness. This man, who had tormented me, imprisoned me, was gone. But his death was also a door, the door to my freedom, to Charles's future. Tony, true to his nature, he was less interested in mourning and more in what he could gain. Within hours of the funeral, he declared himself the new head of the household, swiftly taking control of everything. He inherited the house, the small plot of land, and all the meager assets my father possessed. He strutted around, puffed up with a newfound authority, completely oblivious to the silent, calculating determination in my eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had me trapped forever. But I knew better. This was not the end. This was the beginning. My father's death, though it brought no joy, I brought the one thing I needed most, a real chance. My father's funeral was a bleak affair, attended by a handful of distant relatives and curious townsfolk. Tony, playing the grieving son, moved quickly to solidify his new position. The reading of the will was a formality I dreaded, though I knew what it would contain. As expected, my father, in his final act of control and cruelty, had left everything to Tony. There was no mention of me, no provision, no acknowledgement of my existence beyond a fleeting reference as my son's sister. I stood there, numb, the injustice a bitter taste in my mouth. Tony, meanwhile, smirked, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He was the undisputed master of his domain, believing he had trapped me for good. But his victory was short-lived. The very next day, armed with a newfound courage born of desperation, I sought out Mrs. Laura Wilson. It was a risky move, but she was my only hope, the only person I trusted enough to confide in. I went to her elegant home, my heart pounding, and poured out my story. The truth about Tony, the years of abuse, my desperate longing for a life for Charles. Mrs. Wilson listened, her face a mask of sorrow and quiet fury. When I finished, tears streamed down her face. "My dear Jessica," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You should have told me sooner." She didn't hesitate. "You cannot stay here. You and Charles need to disappear. Completely." Mrs. Wilson then revealed her plan. She had a close friend in Washington, D.C., a kind woman named Martha who owned a boarding house. Martha was always in need of reliable help, and she was known for her discretion. "You can work there, Jessica, in exchange for room and board for yourself and Charles. It won't be easy, but it will be a fresh start. Far away from here." The thought of leaving Tennessee, of venturing into a world so unknown, was terrifying. But the alternative, staying under Tony's thumb, was infinitely worse. I looked at Charles, who was playing innocently on the floor, and knew my decision was made. "Yes," I said, my voice firm despite the fear. "I'll do it. Anything to protect him." Mrs. Wilson immediately began making arrangements, securing our passage, providing me with detailed instructions, and giving me a significant sum of money, enough to get us to D.C. and start anew. The countdown to our true freedom had begun. The night before we left Oak Ridge felt impossibly long. I packed the meager belongings Mrs. Wilson had provided, along with Charles's small clothes, into a single, worn suitcase. Every rustle of fabric, every soft click of the latches, I felt like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence of the house. Tony was out, as usual, lost in his own darkness, completely unaware that his prisoner was about to slip through his fingers. My father's presence, even in death, still lingered, a heavy shroud over the house. But now, mixed with an exhilarating sense of impending freedom, just as the first hint of pre-dawn light painted the sky, I crept to the back door. Charles, a warm, sleepy bundle in my arms. Rosie was waiting. She stood there, a slender, determined figure wrapped in a thick shawl. Her red hair, a vibrant streak against the gray morning. Her eyes, usually so bright, were now heavy with unshed tears. She didn't speak. I just took Charles from my arms for a moment, pressing a kiss to his soft hair. Her lips trembling. "He's going to have such a good life." "Jessica," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're doing the right thing." Then, a rustle behind us. Mrs. Wilson emerged from the shadows of the old oak tree, her face etched with a mix of sorrow and resolve. She stepped forward, her elegant hands reaching out, not for Charles, but to cup my face gently. Her eyes, filled with a profound understanding, met mine. "My dear," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I know this journey will be hard, but remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. You are the bravest woman I know. Go, live, and never look back." She pressed a small, folded note into my hand, a final emergency contact. Perhaps, or simply a last gesture of support. "You deserve a life of peace, Jessica, both of you." Her words were a balm to my raw soul. A final, unconditional blessing, with a final, tearful embrace with Rosie, and a solemn nod to Mrs. Wilson. I turned, clutching Charles, and walked towards the waiting bus. The cold morning air felt like a cleansing breath. I didn't glance back at the house, at the town that had held me captive. My gaze was fixed on the road ahead. on the promise of Washington, D.C. On the future, I was desperately, fiercely claiming for my son and for myself. The 18-hour bus journey to Washington, D.C. was a blur of exhaustion and exhilarating anticipation. Charles slept for most of it, nestled safely in my lap, his innocent breaths a steady rhythm against my own anxious heart. Every mile that passed felt like a layer of the past peeling away, the dark shadow of Oak Ridge shrinking behind us. When we finally arrived, the sheer scale of the city was overwhelming. Towering buildings, endless streams of cars, and a kaleidoscope of faces. So many faces, none of them familiar, none of them holding the power to judge. This was it. This was our blank slate. Finding Mrs. Martha's boarding house was a relief. It was an old, stately building, a bit worn around the edges, but exuding an aura of quiet history and warmth. Mrs. Martha herself was a formidable yet kind woman, with sharp eyes that missed nothing but a gentle demeanor that put me at ease. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing look. Obviously briefed by Mrs. Wilson. "Welcome, Jessica," she said, her voice gravelly but welcoming. "Your room is ready. Charles is a lovely boy." She immediately set me to work, starting with simple tasks, cleaning rooms, assisting in the kitchen, helping with laundry. The hours were long, the work was hard, but every tired muscle, every aching joint, was a testament to my freedom. I was earning my keep, building a life, something I'd never been allowed to do. To truly shed my past, I adopted a new identity. Jessica Randall, the disgraced daughter of Oak Ridge, ceased to exist. I became Jessica Smith. It was a simple change, but it felt monumental. A declaration of independence. Charles thrived in this new environment. Mrs. Martha and the other kind-hearted staff at the boarding house, many of whom were single women making their own way, became his surrogate family. They doted on him, played with him, and filled his days with laughter and affection. He was a happy, healthy boy, growing up surrounded by kindness, untouched by the horrors I had endured. Watching him, free and joyful, was my greatest reward. The quiet affirmation that every risk, every pain, every desperate struggle had been worth it. Washington, D.C. was more than just a city, it was our refuge, our beginning. Life at Mrs. Martha's boarding house settled into a steady, comforting rhythm. The hard work was a welcome distraction, filling my days with purpose, and the kindness of Mrs. Martha and the other residents slowly began to mend the raw edges of my soul. Charles, now almost 3, was a whirlwind of energy and joy, his laughter echoing through the hallways, a sound that brought tears to my eyes. He was blossoming, utterly free from the shadows of our past. And that was all that mattered. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a new guest arrived. He was an older gentleman, impeccably dressed, with a quiet dignity and eyes that held a lifetime of stories. His name was Mr. Robert. He moved into one of the smaller, quieter rooms, and for the first few days, he kept to himself. But Charles, with his boundless curiosity and innocent charm, found a way to bridge the gap. He would toddle past Mr. Robert's open door, sometimes pausing to offer a shy smile or a garbled word. Mr. Robert, initially reserved, found himself captivated by the little boy. Slowly, tentatively, their bond grew. Mr. Robert, who had no children or grandchildren of his own, became the grandfather Charles had never known. He would spend hours with Charles, reading him stories in his deep, resonant voice, teaching him to play checkers, patiently answering his endless why questions. He saw the world through Charles's eyes again. And in turn, Charles brought a profound joy back into Mr. Robert's solitary life. He taught Charles about stars and history, about kindness and perseverance. And he saw something in me, too, not just a hard-working young woman, but a resilient mother. Mr. Robert became my quiet champion. He encouraged me to learn, to read, to dream beyond the walls of the boarding house. It was his subtle guidance that led me to enroll in evening classes, slowly piecing together the education I'd been denied. Years passed, filled with the warmth of this newfound family. Mr. Robert, though frail, was a constant, loving presence. He lived to see Charles start school, to watch him excel, to see him grow into a bright, confident young boy. Just before his own passing, a peaceful departure in his sleep, Mr. Robert made sure that Charles and I were secure. He had no direct heirs, and in his will, he left a substantial portion of his estate to me, designated specifically for Charles's education and our future. He also ensured we had a small, comfortable house of our own, just a few blocks from the boarding house. A true home where Charles could have a yard to play in, a safe space of his own. His quiet kindness, his unconditional love, and his final act of generosity cemented his place not just as a guest, but as an indispensable part of our new family, the grandfather who had given Charles a future. Years spun by, blurring into decades. The modest house Mr. Robert had left us became a true home, filled with laughter, learning, and the comforting routines of a normal life. I continued to work at Mrs. Martha's boarding house until Charles started high school, by which time the small inheritance from Mr. Robert, carefully managed, allowed me the freedom to focus solely on him. I devoted myself to being the mother he deserved, nurturing his bright mind and gentle spirit. Charles grew into an extraordinary young man. He was intelligent, kind, and possessed a quiet strength that reminded me, sometimes, too, of the man he never knew was his biological father, but mostly of the resilient spirit I had fought so hard to instill in him. He excelled in school, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university, where he pursued a degree in engineering. My heart swelled with pride watching him walk across that graduation stage, a future stretching out before him, completely unburdened by the darkness of my past. His happiness was my greatest triumph. He met a wonderful young woman during his college years, a brilliant and compassionate soul named Sarah. They fell deeply in love, married in a small, joyful ceremony, and soon after, blessed me with the most precious gifts, my grandchildren. Holding them, feeling their tiny hands grip my finger, seeing their innocent eyes filled with curiosity, was a profound joy, a miracle I never dared to dream of. Charles built a beautiful life, a testament to the love and sacrifices that had brought him here. He became a successful engineer, a loving husband, a devoted father. He lived the normal, happy life I had always craved for him, a life completely free from the shadows that had haunted my youth. And the secret, the truth about his biological father, about Tony, about the horrors of Oak Ridge, I kept it buried deep, locked away in the quiet corners of my heart. It was my burden, not his. He grew up knowing only love, stability, and the unwavering devotion of his mother and the kind family we had built in Washington, D.C. He knew nothing of the violence, the shame, the twisted lineage. And that, I knew, was the greatest gift I could ever give him, a clean slate, a pure, untainted beginning, and a future built solely on happiness and unconditional love. My own life, though marked by unimaginable scars, found its ultimate purpose and fulfillment in his joy. Now, at 73 years old, my hair silvered by time, my hands gnarled with age, I sit here, in front of this camera, ready to tell my story. It's a story I've carried in the deepest recesses of my heart for decades. A secret that has shaped every breath I've taken since leaving Oak Ridge. But time is a fickle thing, and I feel its relentless march. I want my truth to be heard. Not for vengeance, but for a different purpose entirely. I'm sharing this on Tenacity Tales because I want to reach out to every woman, every person who might be trapped in their own dark corners, feeling hopeless, feeling invisible. There is a way out. There is always a way out. My life, my very survival, is proof of that. You don't have to carry your burden alone. There are people, like Mrs. Wilson, like Rosie, like Mrs. Martha, like Mr. Robert, who will appear in your life like beacons in the darkest night. You just have to be brave enough to look for them, to trust them, to reach out. And the most miraculous part of my journey, it wasn't finding strength in the face of adversity or escaping the chains of my past. It was the moment I finally believed I was worthy of a better life. I believed I deserved happiness. I believed Charles deserved a pure, untainted future. I will carry the secret of Charles's true father to my grave. It's a burden I choose to bear. For his peace, for his happiness, for the beautiful, normal life he has built. He knows nothing of the monstrous truth, and he never will. If I can help it, his joy, his family, his bright, untroubled eyes, that is my legacy, my redemption. So, if you're listening, if you're watching, please support Tenacity Tales and other voices that offer hope. And remember my words, I chose life. I chose love. I chose to protect my son. And in doing so, I chose myself. Always choose yourself and those you love